Raising awareness of these types of cancers is, phenomenally important, because they're the ones that I think people probably talk about the least. There's probably an issue around because of where they impact a female, because they're in sort of what we might say, private parts of areas of the body that we don't necessarily talk about. I think as a result of that, symptoms and signs are probably missed from a female point of view, and also males, whether they're husbands or children or family members that might recognize those symptoms but are too afraid to perhaps talk about. We didn't know anything about ovarian cancer before my mum was diagnosed. We had no idea what it was. We had no idea what the symptoms were, because we just weren't aware, and we didn't have, there weren't campaigns that were telling us about it. There weren't posters up at the GP surgery telling us about what the symptoms might be. So I think by the time my mum had picked up on the symptoms, by the time we picked up on the symptoms, it was really in the medical people's hands. And by the time she was diagnosed, it was already at stage 3, which, as we know, is a difficult time to be diagnosed. So I think raising awareness about ovarian cancer or general gynecological cancers is hugely important. And I would say probably, in communities like mine, even more important, because there is that even bigger taboo about sort of talking about these kinds of, cancers, because of where they impact on the body. Mum was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer in 2016. She'd gone through months of sort of testing for it, and they finally confirmed it. I mean, I still remember the day of diagnosis, and I was coming home from work, and I told myself I'm going to be strong, I'm going to be brave. But as soon as I saw her, because she sort of texted me to say we'll talk about it at home, and when somebody says that to you, it's not going to be good news. So I remember when I got home and her and my dad confirmed that she had ovarian cancer, I just sort of broke down. She broke down, my dad broke down. It was a really, and that images and that memory is so vivid in my head. But she said to me, "Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere." And she didn't for 2 years, but I wish she didn't go anywhere for much longer than that. And it was a really challenging journey, because she went through her ups and downs. She had lots of chemotherapy, all the standard side effects of chemotherapy. She lost all of her hair. Her diet was out of the window. Her taste buds had gone. She was regularly losing consciousness at home from the treatment. And going through that for the first time was incredibly challenging. And luckily we had a very supportive friend and family network that was always around. And then she had massive sort of debulking surgery to remove whatever they could. Couldn't get it all. We went into hospital around November, December, I think it was about November of 2017, to see her consultant, and she was in a very, very weak state at that point. I mean, we were sort of having to get her out of the car and put her into the wheelchair to take her in. I knew what we were going to hear, but for the consultants to sort of finally say to her that there was nothing more that they could do, and again, those little things that stick in your mind. I remember her reaction. It was just a sort of a hand. She wasn't able to necessarily articulate herself or communicate. I don't know what it would have been like for her to have heard those words, but I certainly know what it felt like for me to hear those words. And it was, again, just a moment of sort of, we couldn't control our emotions at that time. And we had my mum's sister there, who was much stronger than us, and she was still asking the right questions and still trying to find out what the next steps were. If we had known about target ovarian cancer at the time, I don't know necessarily. Obviously, nothing would have been done in terms of, nothing could have been different. But I don't know, maybe that journey for us would have been a bit easier. We would have had people that we could have, leaned on for support. Maybe people that had experienced it and survived it. We had Macmillan nurses, we had the NHS, providing all their great service. But I think for myself and my dad to perhaps have somebody to talk to who had been through that journey, even if it was talking to somebody who had lost a loved one, because we were preparing for that. We knew what was coming, but I don't think we were ever prepared for that moment when she was at home in her bedroom and, she finally, I remember asking the question of the nurse, it looked like she had gone, and I asked the nurse if she'd gone, and the nurse had a check and decided that she had gone. And it was all those memories, even talking about it now, they're just so vivid. They're just so, I can't sort of get them out of my head. Not that I necessarily want to, because it's nice to talk about them. It's therapeutic, it's cathartic to sort of kind of go through it all. But, to have organizations like Target Ovarian Cancer, I think if more and more people now know about the symptoms, know about the signs, and know about the work you do in terms of the support you provide, I would say to anybody that, don't be scared, don't be afraid. It's even if you know that the end is going to be the worst possible outcome, we all need support, including the person going through it. If my mum had support from people, even if she wasn't able to communicate, if she was able to hear at least people, I don't know if that would have made her journey, easier. I'm not sure, but having that knowing that somebody's there who's been through it, I think is really, really important, even though you feel like you're on your own and nobody understands what you're going through at that time. And I genuinely felt that way. I felt that nobody knew what I was going through, even though now in hindsight, I know that there are lots of people that knew what I was going through. Obviously, grief is very personal. I understand that, and everyone's grief is their own. I just felt a little shortchanged because I was getting married. She also died 5 days before my 30th birthday. She was only 56. I felt that it wasn't the right time. It was grossly unfair. But then from a perspective point of view, I knew that there were people out there who had lost parents much earlier in their lives. I can now look back and say that I got 29 great years with my mum when other people can't say that. I wish I had 49, 59 great years with my mother, but you've got to take it for what it is. And I think if charities can, if target ovarian cancer can make people's lives better and make that journey easier, even if that journey is going to end in the worst possible way, then I think we've got to do everything we can to raise awareness and get people knowing about the charity. I mean, I think raising awareness in minority communities is absolutely huge, because I think a lot of minority communities, sometimes there's genetic issues, or there's certain cancers that might affect minority groups more than others. But I think cancers like this, where we just don't want to talk about them, your breast cancers, your gynecological cancers, your prostate cancers, because they're private, they're a bit awkward to talk about, and they're a bit awkward to get checked out. And so many of us in minority communities, we don't get checked out early enough because we just sort of pass them off as something else. We're too embarrassed to go to our GP and have our GP look at parts that are private to us. We're too embarrassed to talk to somebody about it, so we keep those symptoms to ourselves, because again, it's part of our sort of private anatomy, and we don't want to share that with anybody, especially older, more conservative people. But I think at the end of the day, we've got to realize that cancer does not discriminate. It doesn't care whose body it's taking over. It can be anybody. And if we're not raising awareness in minority communities, so in my kind of Sikh community or the wider South Asian community, if we're not raising awareness, if people like me who look like me aren't talking more about it, then I think people in those communities are going to carry on shying away from it. And by the time they're finally diagnosed with any of these kinds of cancers, sadly, it may well be too late. I mean, in my mum's case, it wasn't something that we hid away from. We didn't hide away from the fact that it was ovarian cancer. She'd always had problems with her ovaries because after me, she couldn't conceive. So there was always something quite not right. But we don't know, looking back, should it have been picked up much earlier? Should she have had her ovaries removed much earlier? Hindsight's really great, but perhaps those were conversations that weren't being had enough. She wasn't having those with her GP. We weren't having them with each other. And I don't know if subconsciously it was because of the type of cancer it was. I mean, maybe she didn't feel comfortable talking about her ovaries. Maybe I didn't want to bring it up. And we're not necessarily a conservative family. We weren't a conservative family at all. But there are families out there in my community and beyond that might be very conservative, that think it's not right to talk about these things. But at the end of the day, it's your life on the line here. You can either not talk about it and potentially have your life cut short because you're too embarrassed to talk about it or too embarrassed to get it checked, or you can confront it head on, be open about it. It's in your body, it's affecting you. It's really good to talk about it. And what you can do is you can not only raise awareness about what you're going through, but you can save not only your life, but so many other people's lives by talking about it as a conservative, religious, ethnic minority person. You can talk about it in places of worship. You can talk about it in community groups. And actually somebody listening who might have a symptom that they haven't got checked out might suddenly think, gosh, that sounds like what I've got. I better get myself checked out. And, we don't even realize the impact that we can have and the number of lives that we can save or the number of lives that we can prolong based on these conversations that we're having. So I just think, from a community point of view, we need to break that taboo, get rid of this issue that we don't want to talk about cancers or parts of our body that are private to us, because ultimately the cancer doesn't give a damn where it's impacting you and whose body it's in. It's going to, if it wants to destroy you, it's going to destroy you. And it's really up to you to talk to your GP, to get the help, to talk to your family, to talk to your community, to raise awareness. There's so much we can do, and there's so much more we need to do in minority groups to save more minority people's lives.